I remember the exact moment it hit me. The weight of her words pressing into my chest so sharply, it felt like someone had shoved a knife through my ribs. My mom, Linda, leaned back in her worn armchair, a smug expression on her face, and said, "You know, sometimes I wish you'd just disappear from my life." She didn't yell. She didn't storm or slam anything. It was casual, like she was commenting on the weather, but it cut through me deeper than any scream could have. I sat there on the couch, stiff, heart hammering, staring at the patterned carpet like I might find a hole to crawl into. I didn't respond because, honestly, I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to someone wishing you didn't exist? Growing up, I'd learned early that nothing I did was ever enough for her. When I was 8, I had brought home a drawing I was proud of, a clumsy rainbow that I'd spent hours on. I remember her glance, sharp and assessing, followed by, "You could have used more color, but I guess it's fine." Fine. That word haunted me more than any insult. My report cards, my piano recitals, my college acceptance, she always found a way to diminish it. Nothing was ever celebrated. It was always, "could be better." Not like your cousin. Or you're trying, I guess. And now, years later, sitting in that living room smelling faintly of lemon-scented polish and old perfume, she had gone a step further. She didn't just criticize. She dismissed my entire existence. I felt the familiar swell of anger rising first, hot and raw behind my ribs, before it curled into a knot of shame. I hated that it hurt me so much, hated that I still wanted her approval despite decades of proof that it would never come. My hands fidgeted with the edge of the couch cushion, pulling at the fabric until my nails dug into the foam. I could hear her breathing, calm and measured, completely unaware or perfectly aware of the chaos she'd unleashed. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell her how cruel she had been my whole life, but my voice caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. I started, but the words faltered. What could I even say? "You're wrong." That sounded childish. "You're awful." That felt too honest, too dangerous. And really, none of it mattered, because she had already decided what I was in her mind. A disappointment, a burden, someone she could erase with a flick of a phrase. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, as tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I had trained myself not to. Instead, I sat frozen, my mind running through every insult, every belittlement, every casual dismissal from my childhood to now, all threading together into a tapestry of quiet devastation. After a while, she went back to her knitting, humming softly, completely unconcerned with the trail of wreckage she left behind. I stayed put on the couch, feeling small, hollow, almost invisible. The words echoed over and over. "I wish you'd just disappear." Each repetition chipped away a little more of the part of me that still hoped she might love me someday. The part that remembered moments when she smiled, when she held me, when she pretended I mattered. And as that part crumbled, something new began to form. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet, simmering clarity. I realized, in a way I hadn't before, that I had to protect myself. That maybe, just maybe, her words weren't just cruel, they were a key. A permission to do what I had been afraid to even consider. I left her house that evening with the cold winter air biting my cheeks and lungs. Each step crunching on the sidewalk felt like a small defiance, like reclaiming pieces of myself I had lost over decades. I thought about my life, the jobs I had taken to escape her judgment, the friends I had leaned on when she dismissed me, the nights I had cried silently in my bedroom pretending to sleep, and I realized, with a chilling calmness, that for the first time, I didn't want to run toward her love or validation. I wanted to run away. Not just physically, but entirely, emotionally, mentally. She had voiced a wish, and I now had the power to honor it in my own way, on my own terms. Sitting alone later that night, I replayed her words over and over, and for the first time, I didn't just feel pain, I felt something else possibility. It was terrifying, thrilling, and undeniably mine. I couldn't unhear her, couldn't erase the sting, but I could start thinking about a life where her opinion no longer dictated my existence. And in the back of my mind, a thought whispered, insistent and steady. Maybe, if I really gave her what she wanted, she would finally understand what she had lost. After that night, I started to pull away. At first, it was small things, less texting, fewer calls, skipping the obligatory Sunday dinners I had been attending out of habit more than desire. I told myself it was self-preservation, that I needed space to breathe. But part of me was testing something deeper. What would happen if I stopped being available? Would she notice? Would she care? I expected resistance, anger, maybe guilt-tripping texts or phone calls. But for the first few weeks, there was nothing. Not a single message. Not a single attempt to reach me. That silence was deafening and surprisingly intoxicating. The first holiday without me felt strange. Thanksgiving rolled around, and I sat in my apartment, peeling a turkey sandwich in the quiet, listening to the hum of my refrigerator. My phone didn't buzz. There were no last-minute invitations, no passive-aggressive notes about family obligations, nothing. And instead of the familiar pang of abandonment, I felt a strange relief, like I was finally breathing freely after years of holding my breath in her presence. I had imagined her panicking, fretting, maybe even guilt-tripping my dad or siblings. But instead, it was as if my absence was invisible, and that hurt in a different, sharper way. I had always wanted to matter to her, and here was proof that I had never truly done so. Over the next months, I began building a life that had nothing to do with her. I spent evenings exploring little corners of the city I'd ignored, trying new hobbies, meeting friends who didn't see me as a project or a disappointment. I painted, I wrote, I laughed, often more than I had in years. And yet there was this undercurrent of guilt that followed me, whispering that maybe I was being selfish, that maybe I should call her, check in, reassure her. I ignored it. I had promised myself I wouldn't. I had promised myself that if she truly wished I'd disappear, I would honor that wish. But on my own terms, not by being cruel by simply existing without her influence. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her life on social media. There she was, smiling with friends, posting about her garden, bragging about my little cousin's latest achievement. Each photo made my stomach twist. A cocktail of resentment, sadness, and a faint satisfaction that she wasn't getting the validation she had always demanded from me. My absence was a shadow she hadn't been able to fill. And yet, I felt no triumph, only a slow, creeping understanding that she might actually miss me too late, when it no longer mattered. The tension escalated the day she finally reached out. It wasn't an apology, of course. She never apologized. It was a carefully worded email, neutral on the surface but dripping with need. I could use your advice on something important. Please call me when you can. My chest tightened as I read it. My first instinct was to delete it immediately, to reinforce my boundaries. But something in me hesitated. Part of me wanted to see the panic, the unspoken realization that I wasn't coming back automatically this time. Part of me still wondered if she could change. But I knew the truth. I had been chasing approval for decades. Now, I had finally stopped. I let the email sit. Hours passed. I didn't respond. The next day, another email. This one was sharper, more urgent. I really need you. I can't deal with this alone. And suddenly, I saw her clearly, not the mother I had once idealized, not the woman capable of unconditional love, but a person terrified that the absence she had demanded might actually be permanent. The realization hit me like a cold wave. This was the person who had dismissed my childhood, my achievements, my very existence, and now she was discovering the consequences of her cruelty. I resisted the urge to feel guilty, although it bubbled up insistently. Instead, I watched, quietly, as she tried in small, indirect ways to pull me back in. A text to my sister mentioning me. A casual comment at a family gathering about how I hadn't been around. I stayed distant, measured, careful. I was no longer the child bending to her will, no longer the daughter whose life revolved around her approval. I had become my own person, and the more I ignored her attempts, the more obvious it became that she had underestimated me. That was a small, cold comfort, but it was mine. By the end of the year, the pattern was clear. I had created a boundary she couldn't cross, a truth she couldn't deny. I existed outside of her control, and that realization seemed to terrify her more than anything I had done before. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My world expanded, filled with people who treated me with respect, friends who listened, colleagues who valued me, and a sense of self-worth I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. For the first time, I began to see that my mother's words, the ones that had hurt me so profoundly, had also given me something unexpected: freedom. And as her attempts to reach me grew more desperate and her subtle panic became more visible, I realized that for the first time in my life, I held the power and I wasn't about to give it up. It wasn't immediate, but I began to notice cracks forming in her life. Small at first, subtle, almost imperceptible. A missed appointment here, a forgotten commitment there, a friend quietly stepping back. I saw it and felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and guilt, like a shadow moving across a room, inevitable yet impossible to stop. She had always expected me to pick up the pieces whenever her world wobbled, but now I stayed still, quiet, deliberate. I realized I had been given a gift by her cruelty, permission to step back entirely. I could finally give her what she had so callously wished for. My absence, she called me one evening, voice strained, tight, like a balloon overfilled with desperation. I need your help with something, she said, hesitation clinging to every word. I could hear the expectation beneath it, the assumption that I would drop everything for her, that I would bend just as I always had. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I felt my chest rise and fall, the calm in my lungs steadying me. She had asked me to disappear. Now, I could. And I realized that silence was my most potent weapon. Every interaction after that was a test, one she didn't realize she was taking. I learned about her difficulties indirectly through my sister, through shared acquaintances, and each time, the instinct to reach out tugged at me. But I didn't. I reminded myself of the long years of belittlement, of the holidays I had spent trying and failing to be enough. She had built her life expecting me to fill gaps, to be the cushion for every stumble. And now, she was facing a reality where I wasn't available, and I was learning, almost with glee, how powerless that made her feel. I planned my responses carefully, though in truth, it wasn't planning as much as restraint. She called one night in a panic over a financial mishap, voice shaking, blaming the world for her negligence. My first impulse was to rescue her, to fix it like I always had, but I held back, imagining the satisfaction of letting her face the consequences of her own actions. My hands trembled slightly on the phone, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of holding the power she had spent decades wielding over me. She had underestimated me, always, and now the scales were tipping. I began documenting her patterns, mentally noting the moments where she expected compliance, where she assumed I would cave. She would email my friends subtly, trying to get information about me, or drop hints to my sister about how fragile she was and how someone should check on her. Each time, I remained silent. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent years shaping me into someone who placated her whims, and now she was learning, painfully, what it felt like to be left behind. The realization sent a rush through me that was almost dizzying in its intensity. There were moments when I questioned myself, of course. Nights alone when I wondered if I had become the cruel person she might have imagined, if my inaction was harsh. But then I remembered the countless times I had run toward her needs, while she ran toward everyone else's desires, dismissing mine. I remembered her words, the ones that had shattered me. I wish you'd just disappear. I had promised myself I wouldn't act from rage, but from principle, and principle now demanded that I stay absent, that I create boundaries she could not breach, that I finally be the one who chose when and how to appear in her life. And then came the moment I realized she truly understood for the first time. My silence became a mirror she couldn't break, a reflection of her own cruelty and neglect. She reached out less frequently, and when she did, the urgency was sharp, almost frantic, as if each call reminded her that she couldn't compel my presence. The power dynamic had shifted so subtly that she didn't even know how to respond. I had become the person she had tried and failed to control, and in that control or lack thereof, I found a calm I had never known. The turning point crystallized during a minor crisis. A friend had moved, and she wanted my help coordinating something complicated, expecting my usual compliance. I could have said yes, patched it together, ensured she felt secure. Instead, I did nothing, deliberately letting her navigate it without me. I watched the situation from a distance, noting her agitation, her frantic attempts to involve others, her growing realization that the daughter she had once controlled was no longer a tool at her disposal. In that moment, I felt the unmistakable surge of empowerment, tempered by clarity. This wasn't just revenge. This was finally, painfully, beautifully justice. I finally understood the liberation in absence. She had asked me to disappear, and I was granting her wish not with malice, but with deliberate detachment. Her panic, her frustration, her attempts to manipulate now fell flat, like waves hitting a cliff. I wasn't the child she could bend. I wasn't the safety net she could exploit. I was myself. And as her world began to wobble under the weight of her own neglect, I realized that I had crossed a threshold. I had stopped surviving for her approval, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my own life, one deliberate, satisfying choice at a time. The day she finally confronted me, I knew it would come. It had been building for months, a storm slowly forming behind her polished, desperate smile. I wasn't at home when the call came. I was in a cafe, the hum of conversation and clatter of cups grounding me as I answered. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice trembling, edge sharp with anger that barely masked fear. I paused, letting the silence stretch, tasting the irony. She had wished for my absence. I was finally giving it to her. "I'm doing what you asked," I said calmly, each word deliberate. My hands rested on the warm ceramic cup before me, gripping it lightly, feeling the solidity of it. "You said you wanted me out of your life. I'm respecting that." I could hear her inhale sharply, disbelief tinged with fury. The way she had always dismissed me, disregarded my feelings, now looped back at her, a mirror of her own cruelty. Her reaction was immediate, raw, almost animalistic. "You can't just abandon me," she snapped. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I realized she was seeing the consequences of decades of neglect. She demanded explanations, accusations spilling over like water from a broken dam. "You always leave! You never care! Do you know what it's like for me without you?" Every syllable dripped with the desperation she had tried to mask for so long. I listened quietly, heart pounding, the familiar rush of fear and anticipation mixing in my chest. I wanted to feel guilty, wanted to soften, to reach out, but I didn't. I had spent years being the one who bent, who sacrificed, who apologized for existing. This time, I didn't flinch. Her words hit me in waves, but instead of retreating, I let myself feel the satisfaction of owning my own space. I repeated something back to her she had once said to me during a particularly cruel argument in my teens. "I wish you'd just disappear from my life." The silence that followed was staggering. I could hear her breathing, uneven, sharp, the hum of the cafe fading as the weight of her own words sank in. She couldn't deny it. She had spoken the truth of her own heart, and now she was living it. You're saying this is revenge?" she asked, voice trembling, half accusation, half fear. I shook my head slowly, letting her misinterpret. "It's not revenge. It's reality. You asked for this. I'm just giving you what you wanted." The way her jaw tightened, the subtle flare of nostrils, the faltering of words, it was a perfect storm of shock and humiliation. For decades, she had controlled the narrative, dismissed my needs, my accomplishments, my presence, and now she had no foothold, no words to twist me back into compliance. The power shift was complete, and I could finally feel it in my bones. Her anger escalated, sharp and raw. "You think this is fair? You think you're right?" she demanded. I looked at her through the phone, visualizing her pacing, hands twisting her hair, face flushed with frustration. "No," I said slowly. "I don't think it's fair, but I think it's deserved. You said you wanted me gone. You didn't ask nicely, you didn't soften it, and you certainly didn't consider my feelings. Now, you're living with the consequences of that wish." Every word was measured, precise, cutting not out of cruelty, but out of truth. She went silent for a long time, and in that silence, I felt it, the shift, the validation, the liberation. I had spoken my truth, laid down my boundaries, and refused to be drawn back into the old dynamic. Her misery wasn't something I had orchestrated. It was the natural, inevitable fallout of years of neglect, entitlement, and emotional cruelty. When she finally spoke again, it was softer, brittle. I didn't think it would be like this." I allowed myself a small, private smile, the kind that comes from knowing justice isn't just imagined, it's earned. When I hung up, my chest heaved with a strange combination of relief, triumph, and release. I had faced her anger, her desperation, her humiliation, and I had stood my ground. I wasn't bitter, not really. I was lighter, freer, more myself than I had ever been. For the first time in years, I wasn't running toward her approval or validation. I was running toward my own life, my own peace. As I walked out of the cafe, the city lights reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I could still remember the nights I had cried alone, hoping for love I would never receive. I could still feel the sting of words that had tried to erase me. But now, I had taken back what was mine. And though she was miserable, though her world had shifted and faltered, I knew I had done nothing wrong. I had simply existed, and that alone was enough to honor myself. The days after that confrontation were quieter than I expected. The storm had passed, but the echo of it lingered, like the last ripple of a stone thrown into a still pond. I noticed things that had always been background noise: the soft hum of my apartment heater, the distant chatter of neighbors, the way sunlight spilled across my kitchen counter in the morning. For the first time in years, I felt the luxury of peace. I didn't check my phone obsessively. I didn't worry about her moods, her complaints, or her expectations. I existed for myself, and it was intoxicating in a way I hadn't realized I had been starving for. I learned about her continued misery through subtle channels. My sister would mention, almost in passing, how mom was struggling to manage simple tasks, how friends were pulling away, how she kept asking about me in ways that made it painfully clear she hadn't adapted to my absence. I didn't gloat out loud, didn't share these details to taunt her, but privately, I acknowledged a truth that was satisfying in its quietness. The consequences of her words had landed exactly where they belonged. She had wished for my disappearance. I had given it to her. And unlike her, I wasn't suffering from it. I was thriving. I began to rebuild the life that had been sidelined for her whims. Weekends became mine. Hikes in the forest. Long afternoons in cafes with friends who listened. Evenings spent painting or reading simple things, but profound after years of neglect. I noticed small shifts in myself, a confidence that wasn't brittle or self-conscious, a patience I hadn't known I possessed, a recognition that I could exist fully without needing approval from someone who had never truly offered it. The liberation was intoxicating, not because it was revenge, but because it was earned. Occasionally, I thought about what this had done to me, not in regret, but in reflection. Loving someone who had hurt me so deeply was complicated. I realized that I had been carrying pieces of her cruelty, allowing it to shape my choices, my self-worth, my voice. Now I could see it clearly. I could see how many years I had spent trying to bend to someone who had no intention of bending for me. And I could see, for the first time, that setting boundaries, choosing absence, and refusing to participate in her emotional games was not just justified, it was necessary. Life, for me, continued with a quiet joy I hadn't dared imagine. My phone buzzed occasionally with work messages, friends checking in, mundane reminders, but no panic calls, no subtle manipulations. no requests for rescue. I had created a space where my energy was mine, and every so often, when I thought of her, I could allow a flash of satisfaction to pass through me without guilt. She had made her choices. I had made mine. And in that alignment, I found a strange and wonderful peace. I reflected often on the strange justice of it all. Not revenge, exactly, not cruelty, not humiliation for the sake of entertainment, but consequences. Natural, inevitable, fair. She had wished me gone. I had granted her that wish. And in doing so, I had finally stepped fully into my own life, untethered from her expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her misery was the final punctuation mark on a chapter she had written for me, while I turned the page and started a new one entirely under my own hand. I don't deny a flicker of sadness when I think of what could have been, or the daughter I might have had if things had been different. But those thoughts no longer have power over me. I understand now that I don't need her validation to feel whole. I don't need her approval to be enough. I am enough on my own. And in that realization, every insult, every cruel word, every moment of being dismissed becomes fuel, not poison. Fuel for a life lived fully, fiercely, unapologetically. And so, I walk through my days with a lightness I had never known. I answer to no one but myself, and the weight of decades of longing, disappointment, and silent suffering lifts a little more with each step. My mom is miserable. Yes, but I am not. I am free. I am whole. I am present in my own life in a way she never allowed me to be. And in that truth, I feel an undeniable, deeply satisfying release. Sometimes, giving someone exactly what they want is the purest form of justice.